And thank you all. Welcome. It is so good to see you all here. We haven't been able to meet in person since 2019, and it has been a long 4 years, hasn't it? And some of you have been coming to these sessions for year after year after year, and some of you, I think this is your first time. How many of you are here for the first time at a tenant session at the National Income Housing Coalition? Awesome, welcome. Welcome, and how many of you are coming back? You've been here before and you're back for more. Great, welcome back. So you all are why and how we do this work. And at the National Income Housing Coalition, our engagement, our partnership with tenants and tenant leaders is really central to our work. In 1974, Cushing Dolbear founded the National Income Housing Coalition. Yes, and when she did, she made sure that tenants and impacted people were at on the leadership of the National Income Housing Coalition, on its board of directors. And over the decades, Cushing and Sheila Crowley and myself have worked with tenant leaders throughout all of our work. So historically, some of the things that the National Income Housing Coalition has done with tenants, we've had impacted people, tenant leaders on our board of directors. 25% of our board of directors is impacted people. We've had a resident caucus of our board of directors. We've had a Tenant Talk magazine written by and for tenant leaders. We've had a policy committee that tenants have engaged in. And we've had pre-forum sessions at the coalition's conference. And at this pre-forum session in 2019, some of the tenant leaders who were participating, including JR and Rachel and Joy, pushed us, said, we can do more and we can do better and we have to. And they pushed us to really rethink how are we engaging with tenant leaders at this conference, but also throughout the year. How are we making sure that people have a chance to stay engaged throughout the year? So then, of course, the pandemic hit, and plans changed for everybody, but we took that feedback really seriously, and we did a lot of thinking, and we had a lot of conversations. And during the pandemic, the team that's led by Renee Willis, where'd she go? There she is, the fabulous Renee Willis. Yes. And her team that worked with her on this, so including Sid Betancourt and Gabby Ross and David Foster, all here today, really expanded our tenant engagement and the ways that we could support you and your leadership in your communities. So together they created not just Tenant Talk, but Tenant Talk Live, a way to meet on webinars and Zoom and talk with each other about what was happening, about the issues that were most important to you. And those Tenant Talk Live webinars, which I hope everybody's been involved in, and if not, we'll help you figure out how to soon. Those calls went from monthly to every 2 weeks, and now they regularly have over 100 tenants and tenant leaders on those webinars. So we're going to keep those going. The team also created a special Facebook page as another way for you all to connect with each other in between Tenant Talk Live calls and the forum. And then separately, but really related, also in 2020, NLIHC started a process to do better and go deeper in our work to center racial equity and to connect racial justice with housing justice. And so one outcome of that process was that I created a new senior leadership position at the National Income Housing Coalition, an SVP for racial equity, and promoted the fantastic Renee Willis into that position. Right, and then we really had the capacity and the skill to really go deep in our work on tenant engagement. So last year we created NLIHC's first ever tenant leader cohort, which if you're part of it, please raise your hand if you're Abel, lots of tenant leader cohorts here, cohort members here. You'll hear a lot about the tenant leader cohort throughout this session, throughout the forum, because it was such an inspirational time, I think, for all of us. And through the retreat, really, we connected not only more deeply with each other, but we also really created a better understanding and a deeper commitment to advancing and amplifying tenant leadership in our work. And two other things happened that weekend as well. One, we engaged deep in a relationship with the great Rebecca Bennett, who is our facilitator today, and who those of you who don't know her yet will meet her soon. And we also started at that cohort, we started a process of planning for this session. And this session, this pre-forum session that we're having now, is the longest that we've ever had, which was one of the things that tenants asked us for. They said, we don't want to meet just a half a day, we want a full day of tenant sessions. So that's what we have planned over today and tomorrow. And I really just want to emphasize that this is your session. This whole afternoon and tomorrow morning was envisioned and designed by the tenant leader cohort with guidance and support from Renee and Rebecca and the team, but really this is a session by and for tenants and tenant leaders. So I hope you'll all take from it what you need. I hope you'll take healing and connection and take inspiration and support. And I hope too that you'll give during this session, give your wisdom and your experience and your ideas and your mentorship of others. It's an incredibly powerful group that sits in this room, and those who are on their way on a train from New York, I think. And we have tremendous challenges ahead of us with the growing housing crisis, deteriorating public housing, increasing homelessness, Republican proposals to eliminate Section 8 vouchers. You know, we have big work ahead, and we need this time to connect and to build power and to push forward to really achieve housing justice once and for all. So I hope you enjoy these sessions. I hope you enjoy the full conference. I'm really looking forward to spending this time with all of you. And now I will invite up to the stage, it's my pleasure to invite somebody we all know and love, Renee Willis, Senior Vice President for Racial Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion.
Hello, hello, hello. Oh, it feels so good to say that after so many years. It's so good to be in this space together with you all, to be in community. I'm loving every bit of it, and I'm feeling the energy from you all. So thank you for being here, taking your time, and being with us on this day and the days to come. Again, Renee Willis with the Coalition, and I really do. Planning the tenant session is one of the most precious things, I think, in terms of my job and the work that I do, because it gives me an opportunity to work with you all and to bring to fruition what you want to see at these engagements. So I really do thank you for being here, and I think the cohort, and Diane did say you'll hear a lot about the tenant cohort, the tenant and community cohort as we go along. But I really do thank our cohort for being with us in such a, we had lots of robust conversations, especially, when we first started in Albany, Georgia, at the Resora. But I also, too, just want to give a shout out, because I know we have many of our cohort members in this room, but I also know that we have some of our cohort members on Zoom as well. So Jerry Jones, Rebecca Love, Lara Ramos, and Linda Solomon, who is on Zoom, I believe. So thank you all for being with us here today. You have in front of you, you have a packet of information. It has the agenda and the program. This is for you to take with you. We have the agenda you can see on the front cover, but also in the packet you'll see information, a letter actually that the cohort wrote and sent to the Biden-Harris administration. So that's in there, and it's on tenant protections. And you also have in your packet information it's the White House Blueprint for Renters' Bill of Rights. So we'll be having a conversation today about this. We do have folks, as you can see from your agenda, folks coming from the administration. So hopefully get your questions ready because we want you to ask those tough questions because what you'll find in this blueprint from the White House should only be just the beginning. It's just a start. We still have much, much more to do in this work. But I wanted to provide a copy of this to everyone. And then what else do we have in here? And then we have some other goodies in here too. Rebecca Bennett, who is our facilitator. There's a document in this folder from her, but she will provide you with more details. But I called her name. So that means it's time for the incomparable Rebecca Bennett from Missouri, who is our facilitator for today and for tomorrow. And Rebecca was wonderful. She was our facilitator when we were in Albany, Georgia. I think many of you already know her. And for those of you who don't know her, get ready, because she's fantastic. Thank you, Sister Rebecca.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. All right, I come from a call and response tradition, so we want to have a conversation? Yes. So I want to say a few things. The first question I have is how do I advance? Yep. Thank you kindly. Okay, there we go. All right, everybody, I'm just trying to keep up. So I have the privilege of being your facilitator for the next several days, but I also have the privilege of being able to share with you some of the work that I am most excited about and some of the ways of being that I am most excited about. So my name is Rebecca Bennett, and I am a DC native, right? I grew up right across the river in southeast Anacostia, Washington, DC, right off of a little place called Hunter Place, over in Ward 8. And for anybody who knows anything about Washington, D.C., Ward 8 is the best place to be. Now, if anybody else tells you different, don't believe them. I know that we're in Capitol Hill, but I spent the last almost 30 years living in St. Louis. It's important for me to locate myself geographically as we talk about what we're going to lean into today. When we were with our cohort, one of the themes that kept coming up in our planning was conversation about healing. What does healing look like? There is much about this work that we do that can be difficult, that can be exhausting, that can wear us down, right? And that can leave parts of us fractured and fragmented and broken, even though we carry within us great power, great medicine, great vision, right? And a great commitment to creating and seeding healed futures, not just for ourselves, but for our progeny, for those who come after us, right? Am I alone in this? No. So we found that community healing is really important work. But I want to tell you a little story about myself, because technically I have the next 70 minutes, but we started late, so I'm going to compress. That means everybody's going to have to put on their roller skates, right, as we move through this. I want to tell you how I got started in this. I happened to be 4 years old, living in an apartment on Hunter Place, across the river in Anacostia, when one night I was hungry for applesauce. So I got out of my bed in the middle of the night, and I went to the cabinet, and I opened the cabinet, and I got a little bowl for my applesauce. And as I got the bowl for my applesauce, as soon as I stepped to the left, all the cabinets fell down, almost taking my life. Now, I happen to live in a part of the city where people who had limited incomes lived, where the quality of housing that was created was shabby. But it was what my family, what my mother, who was raising me without the benefit of a father, could afford with her 2 jobs. And from that almost near-death experience came a settlement. You all know this doesn't always happen. But by the grace came a settlement because of the fear of what would happen. And that settlement then gave us the means to put a down payment on a house. Not that far from that same place where we used to live. And my mother has been in that house now for 47 years. Right, so I offer that story because I learned pretty early on those same cabinets that were, instead of being screwed in with screws and things, were held with industrial strength staples. Industrial strength staples are what were holding up cabinets. And if you think that my mother's experience was rare, You know. What do we get? We get what's left over. Quality construction? No. So I learned pretty early on that if I had means, I'd have a different experience than if I didn't. And what I decided to do with my life, watching my mother and others fight for something better, was to fight for something better. I decided, my mother said, you pass on the baton, right? And I decided, here I am, I want to be of service. And I spent the next 30 years trying to address areas of deep inequity in lots of different spaces, in policy spaces: educational equity, housing fairness, transportation planning, environmental justice, right, health care, all of those spaces with varying degrees of success. In fact, if I'm honest, with a lot of failure, where the changes that happened were symbolic but not substantive. And in and through that process, I got worn down. But I knew something was missing. And as a part of that process, I said, well, we got to do something to focus on our well-being at some point, somewhere. What do we do to reinforce our well-being? Because for those of us who are not only experiencing conditions of hardship, but also for those of us who are resisting conditions of hardship and actively seeking to transform systems and structures that do not function well for us, the toll is high. But at the time, I wasn't mature enough to be able to put the pieces together. So I was doing well-being stuff on the side and policy and justice transformation stuff on this side and community organizing on this side until August 9th, 2014, when a young man by the name of Michael Brown was killed in a small town called Ferguson, and his body laid in the street for hours. And as a result of that, the governor decided to pull together a commission, and we thought, oh no, not another commission. And that commission was tasked with coming up with policy recommendations and solutions that could help us address the underlying inequities that got us to the places of that young man being killed. And I was asked to serve, and I said, I don't think this is going to do much. And then I was asked again and asked again. And finally, I said yes. And in the very first meeting of that commission, responsible for all of the public engagement activities, we had 500 residents out, and we had 40 or 50 different TV stations and the governor's people, and and we're going through all of the processes that you have to go through to set up a sunshineable process to help us figure out what were going to be the policy solutions and interventions. In the midst of all of our organizing and dealing with the required stuff, a woman stood up in the back of the room and she said this. She said, they're killing our babies. And you're talking about policies and procedures. And I understood in that moment that she was asking us to be accountable for something deeper. She was asking us not to just have a clinical orientation to this work of policy transformation and systems transformation, but to be accountable to lives lost on real bodies. She was asking us to understand what it was to be endangered. There's nothing pathological about us. We are in environments that endanger. And to be accountable to that. To hold that pain, that anguish, that desolation, and then to make decisions with that in heart and mind. And that caused us to change all of our processes. Now, we still did what we were asked to do. We still came up with a report that had 189 calls to action from a policy standpoint and 47 signature priorities, and I chaired the body that was responsible for seeing those things executed for 3 years. And now the next set of people are leading. But in that moment, she was clear, without ever using this term, that if we didn't bring a healing element into this work, we would just risk moving the chairs, but not really transforming the conditions. And that led me to this work of community healing. That helped me grow up and to see how the pieces fit together. And to say, we can't do this systems work, this transformation work, this structural re-engineering and redesign work without doing this healing work. It is what funds everything else. So my purpose today in the time that I have with you, where I get to not serve as facilitator, but instead serve as someone who wants to share what is emerging from my own learning, and I am still deep in the learning, so I'm looking forward to continuing this learning with you, is I want to share what we're learning. I want to validate your sense that something more is needed to transform the human condition than the usual ways that we go about this work. I want to grow the interest and participation in community healing, and I want to affirm that healing together is not just necessary, it is possible. Is everybody with me? Yes. So I'm going to share pretty quickly about my evolving understanding of the field of community healing. I'm going to share some liberatory healing practices that I am sure that you all are engaging in different ways. I just want to call them out so that we can hold them together, and then we'll have a small group activity. I'm going to try to compress it in the time I have, Renee, so I'm going to need somebody to keep me on track because I catch the spirit around this, if you haven't noticed yet. So just for the purpose of getting started, it's important for me to share and for us to have a common frame of reference in terms of how I use terms, because I acknowledge that these words might evoke different frames of reference for different people. They might bring up different things for us, and that's okay. We're not the same. But what is community healing? When you hear those two words, what comes to mind? Anybody? Come on, we're having a conversation. Pain. Thank you, Miss Rachel. Synergy. Tell me more about synergy. Yes. Yes. Yes, yes. Connecting, networking, sympathy, empathy, right? All words that come to mind. David, if there are people online who have things that they want to say, what is community healing to them? We'd like to weave in.
Yeah, Linda says trust.
Trust. Wonderful. Thank you, Linda. A sense of security. Trust, a sense of security, empathy, sympathy, networking, connection, trust, right? All of those things come to mind. Yes, ma'am. Recognition, right? Recognition, witness, right? We need that. Yes, sir. Liberation. Ooh, that's one of my favorite terms. We're about to get into that, right? Liberation. Yes, it's all of that. Come on. Yes, bonding together, friendship, safe spaces. Thank you, Laura. Yes, yes. Resources. Yes. Identification. Right? What identities are we coming from? Did you mean anything different from that?
Yes, I meant connecting with you. I understand where you're coming from.
Yes.
I can identify.
Yes, I can identify with you. Yes, indeed. I can identify with your experience. I see myself connected to you, right? Yes. Empowerment. What was that? Yes. Acknowledgement and acceptance, empowerment. So we all know what this thing is. It is all of that. We are sourcing definitions and descriptions together. And the one that I'm going to give you is simply our thinking, but you'll see that it resonates with your own. For us, when we talk about community healing, we mean everything that you just said and a holistic process that works to make human collectives and the people within them healthy, vital, and well. A holistic process that seeks to make us healthy, vital, and well. And it's going to address lots of different things because we have lots of different aspects. It's going to address mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, social, cultural, economic, ecological needs, housing needs, all of that. All of that falls within this frame of reference. Some things that I know is there are lots of ways to engage in community healing and to integrate community healing into our social transformation efforts. There is no single way. There are many ways. But what we know about the many ways is that taken together, they do four things. One, they develop communal responses to harm, right? So we don't dance around harm. I remember asking my ancestors when Philando Castile was killed, I remember asking, how is it? These same ancestors who were wonderful human beings, but who were forced to live life on their knees or who swung from trees, how is it that they survived without destroying themselves or others? How is it that they did that? And that whatever they did, could it come alive in me, and can we remember it in the context of community? Because the assaults weren't over. Right? So, one of the things I understand is that it has to address harm. Interpersonally, institutionally, societally, because harm happens at all those levels. But that community healing also has to promote life-affirming relationships, which is what Ms. Laura said. It's the key. If we're talking about what fragments us, which fractures us, which alienates or isolates us, then relatedness and connection are the balms that help us heal. Relatedness brings identification with others rather than separation. That identification with others helps generate conscience. That conscience helps change behavior. Right? So they have to address life-affirming relationships that support connection and resilience. Community healing supports us in being creative, right? The master's tools will not dismantle the master's house. The consciousness that created the problem is not the one that will solve it. The last quote was Einstein. So we're invited to get creative rather than to be conditioned. Conditioned, when I say, is doing it this way because this is the way it's always been done. And the last thing is that community healing advances liberation, speaking to the brother in the back, advances liberation as an essential condition of human well-being. If it doesn't make us freer, it's not healing. Right? So when we talk about community healing, we're talking about practices that help us do all four. Practices that help us address harm, practices that help us cultivate relationships, practices that help us get creative, and practices that advance liberation. All of that. Everybody with me? So I want to just share a few minutes, welcome, about why community healing matters. I think intuitively we know this. I'm not going to say anything you don't know, but I love words. And Reverend Dr. Barbara Holmes has some good words. Now, I don't know if you can see, I wear progressives. It's a half a century eyesight. Can you read? Is there someone who can read the quote? You all are like, no. Okay, it is this. Wounds inflicted upon the village pierce the self and soul of us, shatter the I and we of us. We have seen it before so many times, and yet we are surprised and unwilling to look into the vacant gaze of systems that decapitate, mutilate, and incarcerate. Yes, we have seen it before so many times, and yet we are surprised and unwilling to look into the vacant gaze of systems that decapitate, mutilate, and incarcerate. We can stop them, you know. We can stop them, you know. It won't be easy, but it can be done. We're going to hear from Mrs. Sherrod today. We heard from Mrs. Brown. It won't be easy, but it can be done. We can go get and heal the monsters that have been unleashed. It's not enough for me to have those monsters not come after me, because if they're still existing, they're going after somebody. They need to be healed, because most assuredly, they will find their way back to me. So we say community healing is important because of this. I want to share a few other reasons as I keep us moving, reasons that we have come up with about why community healing matters. One, we can't fix what we don't heal. How many of us have been a part of efforts that have expended millions, billions, hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to fix stuff that they didn't even want to touch? Never wanting to reconcile with the damage or the harm that's been done again and 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 again. Hello. Right? So we can patch up our problems, but we can't resolve the underlying issues without becoming accountable to what rests beneath the surface. Right? The patterned behaviors and conditions that endanger our lives. You all in this room have been doing this work a long time. We're not new. We're not starting from scratch. We're a part of a longer lineage of people who have been seeking to address these same issues in one way or another. We cannot fix what we do not heal. We just pretend that we're fixing. So we expend lots of money. And change happens at the margins, but not at the heart. So it's one reason why community healing matters. A second reason is whatever we don't heal, we spread. Let's stop pretending. Right? If we don't heal it, we spread it. It's a popular fiction that we can contain our hurts. Truly, pain is sticky and hurt leaks. We have probably all heard that hurt people hurt people. Right? Hurt people hurt people. How many of us have been hurt by this work? You don't even have to raise your hand, I'm just saying. Right? And we spread our hurt through our mindsets, through our choices, through our words, through our behaviors, through all of those things. We're spreading the hurt. But here's the thing, if hurt people, then transform people, transform systems. Right? Both things happen to be true. Both things happen to be true. So we get to do this work. Right? We do this healing work because we don't want to spread the hurt that we've experienced. And it's not enough to escape the hurt that we've experienced. Escape and survival matter. But if we don't help fix it, we might just be the contagion. Another reason why we do this community healing work is because how well we are shapes how well we do. Right? We can't give what we don't have, but how many of us have been bullied into pushing through our exhaustion, pushing through our hurt, pushing through our limited resources, pushing through our capacities to deliver at all costs? Let me say it a different way. Who in this room has ever trashed themselves to get the job done? Because we believe, right? We believe, we've seen the damage, we've known the harm, we are seeking to do something different, and yet the cost is our health, is our relationships, is our family structures, all those sorts of things, our friendships which get neglected, our bodies, right? I'm not talking to you. I was in the hospital. I understand how this works. Giving my last cent for the cause, right? The job that we do and the state that we're in can never be our best if we are unwell, if we ourselves are unwell. I'm saying that the work matters, but your well-being matters more. Did you hear me? The work matters, but your well-being matters more. Say it with me. The work matters, but my well-being matters what? Oh, come on, y'all don't mean it. The work matters, but what? What is that? Yes, my well-being matters more, right? Because the reason you do the work is to improve the well-being. And if you're improving the well-being that doesn't include your well-being, then that is oppression, that is delivering confusion. That is for everybody but you. You think that's a novel thought? Where did we learn that well-being is not for us? Those same systems and structures that we are seeking to transform. We call that internalized or appropriated oppression. Right? Another reason why it matters is because we get hurt in community, so we need to heal in community. Let's just be real. How many of us got hurt by ourselves with no help? I'm not seeing a single hand. Oh, come on, David, stop playing. We got hurt with help. Whether or not it was from systems or structures or parents or other folks or community members or friends or pastors or whatever, right? So a lot of times when we talk about healing, we think about healing within institutional settings and we think about healing with regard to individuals. But if we go to get help and then we go back into the same set of relationship dynamics that were difficult and ugly and toxic, how strong will our well-being be? There is a place for individual healing. There is a place for institutional support. I am not anti that, so please don't leave here and say, Rebecca didn't say. But I'm saying that we exist within community, within relationships. So our relationships and interactions have been conduits of harm for many of us, and with intentions, they can be channels for healing. So the collective has the capacity to bear more, to move through, to resist, to transform more than individuals can, the collective. So this is another reason why community healing matters. And then the last two things that I will say, because I'm going to keep it moving, The last two things I will say is that it's hard to be healthy in a world that's sick. It's another reason why this community healing stuff matters. It's hard to be healthy in a world that's sick, right? We talk a lot about self-care, which is important. But if we do all those things to care for ourselves, and then again we go back into larger contexts that are seeking to decapitate, mutilate, incarcerate us, what do you think happens to our sense of well-being? Right? We need both self-care and community care. Both self-care and community healing. It's not either or. It's not one or the other. It's both and. We need communities that are well because they help individuals be well, and individuals who are well help create communities that are what? Well. So all of this is important. And the last reason why we say community healing is important is because we are dying from the weight of unresolved trauma. How many of us know folks who are dying? How many of us have ever been folks who are dying? Where this stuff is killing us? To be human in today's world, this is a quote from Bill Plotkin, is to live with layers of unresolved personal, cultural, ancestral, and ecological trauma. We need every healing faculty we have, not only to survive, but to avoid recreating the patterns of harm that are imperiling us and our planet. We need every healing faculty that we have to help us avoid recreating patterns of harm. To avoid recreating patterns of harm. Now I'm going to take you back on a history lesson. I didn't intend to do this, but when the Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria, et cetera, were floating on their way over here, right? When European settlers were coming over, many of them were escaping situations of oppression and persecution. They were seeking to create different conditions for themselves. They understood what it was to be on the bottom of a social and economic caste structure that made them expendable. But they got here, and because they didn't heal, they escaped. Many of them recreated those patterns of harm, those systems of exclusion, recreated those castes, and they became the racial, social, and economic castes that we have inherited and are living in. If we don't heal it, we what? Spread it. This stuff doesn't spontaneously generate out the ether. It comes from somewhere. Hurt has lineage, just like healing has lineage. So there are a few assumptions that guide our community healing work, and I want to reveal those assumptions as we hold the thought of how do we integrate healing into the work that we are doing, right? We just need to be intentional about it. Can we do this? Yes, we can. There are a few assumptions that I want to bring to your attention. The first is that community healing is old work, but a relatively new field of practice in these United States. But it's old work. As long as there have been communities, human communities have had to figure out how to respond to crises and how to recover from crises and how to help their people be well and survive and thrive. Functioning human communities have those capacities. So it's not new work. It's just new terminology. So community healing, healing justice, whatever we call it, right? Old work, but fairly new field here, largely because in the dominant culture that we are part of, healing is the domain of institutions. We often think about physical care, health care, or mental health care, and usually we think about those within institutional settings, not community settings. Right? And usually we also think about that care being individualized. So personalized physical health care, personalized mental health care. All of that is necessary, beautiful people. It is absolutely necessary. What it is not is sufficient. Find me a couch that's big enough to hold all 8 billion of us. Right? What is it that can help us be well in the midst of the normal slings and arrows of everyday life? strong relationships in community, healing practices in community, cultural customs that help us connect, that help us relate, that help us empathize in community, that help us metabolize harm in community. Anytime we have to go someplace else to someone else for something else, we will have accessibility issues, we will have equity issues. So that stuff is necessary, it's just not enough. The second thing is that community healing can be done by, can be supported by specialized expertise. We need therapists, we need ministers, we need medical care providers, we need nutritionists, we need shamans, artists, culture bearers, energy workers. However you do this, we need them. But the work is for who? All of us. All of us. All of us. All of us can do this. You don't have to be a specialist to help hold space for well-being. If that were the case, we are out of luck as a species. We simply don't have enough. Right? We've managed, though, these last few million years because we have cultural custom, because we tend to relationship. Community healing can't be done for communities. To be effective, it has to be rooted in communities, has to be supported by those who are its focus. That means us. We got to do it. For ourselves, in our communities, wherever we live, work, love, play, worship. Community healing is multidisciplinary and it's multidimensional. There are lots and lots and lots of practices. It avoids any single prescription. Why? Because single prescription is often control. So if I were to say there's one way to do this, it's going to exclude so many. There's not one way to do this. There never has been. There are many ways to do this. There are many pathways to healing, and you all are actually activating those many pathways within your respective spaces and places. So what it looks like for unhoused moms who are trying to get it together, what it looks like for queer youth who are doing whatever, what it looks like for parents who are often holding the role of parenting without support, what it looks like for, right, you name it, it's going to look different. The people in our communities with the most potent healing medicines are usually those who've experienced and persevered the greatest pain. I want you to hear me say that one more time. The people in our communities with the most potent healing medicines are usually the ones who have experienced and persevered the greatest pains. Right, so you want to know where the medicine lives in your community? Who's been hurt? Who's been hurt and has survived? Has lived to tell about it without being diminished by it. Whoever those people are, they are great healers in our midst. They have suffered, but they have not identified with the suffering. It happened to them, but it has not become them. You understand the difference? Right? So we don't throw away our people just because we struggled. In fact, that's where we can find some of the greatest healing medicine. Right? Community healing is not the work of a single lifetime. That's the other thing that we keep in mind. It is not the work of a single lifetime. It is the work of every generation. I am so grateful for those who came before me. I am so grateful for that prayer from my ancestors when I said, please, please, tell me, show me what it is that you did to survive without destroying yourselves and others. Reveal that medicine. Help me remember what that is. Every generation has its work. And we take the long view. I learned this in many ways. It is a part of an African cosmological framework, but it is also a part of our First Nation peoples. We're talking about 7 generations, having that 7-generation perspective. So what are the tools that we need to do this community healing work? With intention, we keep it simple. We keep it simple because we don't want any community or any group to be able to say, I don't have what I need to be able to do this. So you're not going to hear me say you need a special thing from Amazon or X amount of money or a grant from so-and-so or this and that. Remember that all healthy human communities have had to have ways of being able to maintain well-being in the face of crisis, in the face of assault, and to aid and abet the recovery of their community members. and the resilience of their community members. So what is it that we need to do community healing work? In our work, in our understanding, there are 5 things that we need. 1, clear purpose. Clear purpose. What are we trying to heal? We come together, what are we trying to heal? Right? However you answer that is okay, but we need clarity of purpose. What are we trying to heal? Purpose provides a shared understanding of our work together. It clarifies what we seek to heal, right? Or what we want to vitalize, what we want to make well. The second thing that we need when we're doing community healing work is quality presence. Now that sounds so easy, but in a world that values productivity more than it values presence, it's actually a very hard thing. Because we've been conditioned to show up with diminished presence. There are so many things that require our attention, always. There are so many distractions, always. But you know how you felt the last time somebody actually listened to you? Really gave you their undivided attention? Asked you, how are you doing? And could linger to find out your real answer? Cared about what you needed and offered support? Nothing that we do, if it comes with fractured presence, will be useful. So can we carve out space to really be with our fellow human beings? That in and of itself, that connection is healing. And it really doesn't matter what we're doing. Hopefully we're not engaging in self-destructive behaviors. But if we're eating together, sitting together, talking together, sharing what's really on our hearts, what our experiences have been, telling stories, telling jokes, playing together, but being quality presence with each other happens to be healing and therapeutic. We also need authentic relationships, real relationships, not relationships rooted in power over, but relationships that are rooted in genuine care and connection for our fellow human beings. Relationships in which we feel a sense of responsibility to one another. And where we can be called in when we need to. Not just called out in a way that separates us, but called in. So authentic relationships are what we need. We need meaningful rituals and processes. There's so many. Sometimes it's grief rituals, it's celebration rituals, or well-being rituals, or eating rituals, right? Dancing rituals, we call those parties, by the way. Right, but what is it that is meaningful to you and to those that you are in community with? And then the last thing is a sense of connection to something greater than ourselves. Because that saying that says life never gives you more than you can handle is a lie. There is only one way that saying is correct. And that is if the second you is plural. Life never gives you singular more than you plural can handle. So then what is that sense of connection to something greater than ourselves? Maybe it's the community, our larger sense of community, our neighborhood, our connections, our peoples. Maybe it's our God or our faith. Maybe it's nature. Maybe it's the field of practice. Whatever it is, we need to be able to connect and ground to something that is bigger than us, that can hold us and our work and our well-being. So all of those things, this is what we need. Everything else is a nice to have. But can we do this community healing work if we have a clear sense of purpose, if we have authentic relationships, if we bring quality presence, if we have meaningful rituals, if we have a sense of connection to something greater than ourselves? The answer is yes. Yes, we can do this. All right, I'm trying to stay on time. Y'all still with me? You're getting quiet. Does that mean you're processing? Yes. Okay, you're present. I appreciate that. So as I wrap it up, and hopefully I'm going to give like 5 minutes. We were going to give you longer, but we're starting just a little bit later, so that's okay. I want to share a couple of healing practices because I did a lot of framing around what is community healing and why does it matter. But really, I want to leave with some practices, some things that I think are useful, both for us as individuals and useful for us as collectives or communities, right? So we can do these things as individuals. We can do these things in relationship. There are 3 practices that I want to share. There are far more than 3, but there are 3 specifically that I want to share. And you'll find all of this on your handout that's in your packet. So remember I said community healing involves many practices, but all of those practices together help us respond to harm at interpersonal, institutional, and societal levels. They promote life-affirming relationships. They help us embrace creativity and processes of renewal, and they advance liberation. They do all of that. So what are 3 practices that can help us lean into that? 1 is to root in positive resources. Root in positive resources. I'm going to say that again. Root in positive resources. You all like, Rebecca, what are you talking about? I'll tell you in a minute. The second is to make room for lament. Remember I told you about the woman who interrupted us in our process, right, when we were meeting as a commission and trying to respond to the killing of this young man, and she said, they're killing our babies. And you were talking about rules of procedure and policy. We must make room for lament because real harm has been done. Real damage has occurred. How will we repair what we do not acknowledge? Does it mean we have to stay there? No. But does it mean that we have to go there? Yes. We make room for lament. And the third thing is we engage in acts of resistance and creativity. Right? So high level, these 3 things. So I want to start by talking about rooting in positive resources. What do we mean by that? When I say this can be a useful practice for you as an individual, it can be a useful practice for you as a community, whatever group or organization that you are part of, this connecting regularly to what fortifies us, giving our attention to the sources of love, meaning, care, connection, and health in our lives. Let's tie the portion of our attention to that. Because so often what happens is that the things that are undermining our life get the majority of our attention. So what we say is, no, I'm going to keep this piece. I'm going to keep this piece of my attention. I'm going to tie this piece of my attention to that which resources me, that which feeds me, that which feeds my community, feeds my group, feeds my organization. We'll spend time here. We connect with what is most well in our lives and communities. What is most well? Our relationships, our commitments, our values, right? Our mission, we connect to what is most well. Right? When we connect to what is most well in our lives and in our communities, it serves as a resource to help us address that which is not well. I would suggest that we don't touch what is not well without touching what is well. Does that make sense? Because the what is well is what can help us touch what is not well without being destroyed by it. And we remember that in the wide web of life, we're always companioned, always by something. Now, what your something is, I will leave to you. But it's just a shorthanded way of saying that we aren't alone. So this makes sense, does it not? To connect to what is positive in your life and to give it your quality, attention, and presence, and to do that as a group. So all of the groups that I work with, all of the organizations that I work with, we touch into what is well before we do the work around what is not. We tend to relationships. How are you? How's your family? What's going on? All those things, right? What is feeding you, nurturing you these days? All of that. We do that as a part of our tending to each other. Now, this seems like it is such an easy thing to do, but my grandmother said common sense is not common practice. Why? It is not because we have character flaws. It is not because we don't know and haven't touched the things that are well in us, but we've been conditioned to rely almost exclusively on our own energies, our own capabilities, our own resources to meet the demands of work and community life. So just on our own self, but you know that like you can get burned out, right? You can get tired. But we've been conditioned to rely on ourselves, to go solo, right? That's a common practice. But it's a common practice for a couple of reasons. One, for many of us who go solo in the work that we do, even in the super heavy lifting work of systems transformation, of community building and community development, many of us who go solo because we didn't get what we needed when we needed it. I just want to say that for a moment. I want to take away the judgment from this. So often, many of us wanted but didn't get, and so we learn to rely on ourselves. That's one reason. But another reason is that systems of oppression actually disconnect us from vital relationships, resources, and supports. That's what they do. That is how they oppress. It's to keep us with a sense of alienation, fragmentation, and separation from those who are our kin. However you define kin. I'm not necessarily talking about blood and bone. I'm talking about values. I'm talking about shared issues and interests and commitments. So it's not our fault. It is not our fault that often our positive resources aren't at the top of our mind. Both oppression and our resistance to it can be draining without reinforcements. But here's what I know about oppression. And I'm sitting in the room with Mrs. Shirley Sherrod, so I'm just going to call it out. Here's what I know about oppression. It has never been a match for fully creative human beings, fully creative, well-connected human beings. That doesn't mean that it hasn't done damage, but somehow creative and connected, that is, we are creating beyond our conditions, and we are connecting to other people, connecting to what resources us, connecting to what matters most. When we are connected and when we are creative, somehow, we manage to make a way. It may not be the way we imagine, but we manage to make a way. So the opportunity is to root in positive resource. What is it that resources you? And how often do you connect to it? And have you made it a part of your practice, your organizational practice, your group practice, before you lean into all that heavy lifting that usually dominates our agendas? Right? My agenda here is to have us integrate healing work and community healing work into the social transformation work that we do. When we do that, we communicate that our well-being matters as much as our work, if not more. The second practice that is useful for us is making room for lament. This is a hard one, particularly in policy spaces, because policy tends to be clinical. The approach to policy is clinical, often. Right? So we want legislatures and executives and people with decision-making authority to make different decisions, but they want to do so in a way that is sanitized and that is removed from the very harm that they have been a part of creating and perpetuating, or that our systems have created and perpetuated. I think sanitized and sanitizing conversations are fictions because they don't reflect what's really happening. And because they don't, then the sense of accountability to what is beneath the surface doesn't develop and mature. So, how do we make room for lament? Well, we tell the truth about our experiences, and we grieve the wounds that we have suffered and that have been inflicted. So, is there space for truth-telling in our gatherings? Right? Again, this is common sense. I'm borrowing from our cultural customs. Like, I'm not making this stuff up. Many of us grew up, came of age, developed in communities that held space for lamentation, that held space for grief, that invited us to testify. And I don't mean before Congress, though that is useful, right? To say, this is what happened. To ask questions, what happened to you? What happened here that needs to be accounted for? Right? We lament with trusted others to help us process our pain and to atone for the hurts that our hurts caused. You heard me say, right? Whatever we don't heal, we what? Spread. So we make room for lamentation. What happens, though, that keeps us from doing that? Well, within the dominant culture we find ourselves, we're taught to endure our afflictions in silence. Often, the communities that we're a part of, the larger systems or structures, don't want to hear our experiences. They don't want to hear all the damage that's been done. And so there are persistent efforts to silence, to quiet, to deride, right? To demean our experiences. And we are encouraged to maintain the pretense that everything is okay. But the truth of the matter is that if we don't get the chance to share, and often share within community, those hurts leak poisons. We carry them alone, or we suffer in silence, and our bodies keep the score. Our dis-ease becomes disease. I believe that in liberation work, our grief and our growth are mutually inclusive. Did you hear that? Our grief and our growth are mutually inclusive. Oppression traumatizes, wounding deeply both of those of us who it targets and those it serves. But when we truthfully feel this and acknowledge it, more space is made. More space is made. We can get more creative because we're not neurologically hijacked. Right? We are often functioning, working, advocating, right? All of those things, organizing, community building, with our nervous systems hijacked by the harms that we are encountering daily. And that hijacking of our nervous system, we can tell because we got stomach issues. We can tell because we tend to hold our breath. We can tell because the jaw is tight. We can tell because the shoulders are tight. Anybody got that lower back pain? Anybody got that knee issue there? Anybody having difficulty sleeping? Oh, what is that? You thought it was just you? No. You thought it was just your genes? No. That's epigenetics. Right? Those are the ways that our bodies are responding to environments of harm and that are toxic. It has to go somewhere. So it goes in those joints, in those muscles, in that sugar. I'm not going to talk about you. I'm just talking about me, right? And when I get stressed, I love my 3 food groups: sugar, salt, and fat. Right? Sugar, salt, and fat. Right? So we make room for lament. Why? Because when we do that, when we can actually talk about this is what is really happening, when we can be witnessed, see, that's the other thing that's important, is to actually be witnessed. Because that witnessing says it's real. It happened here. It happened to you. And we can be okay. Right? We can be okay. Because you know what? You're not here by yourself. It makes a difference. Then our bodies don't have to hold on to it in the same way. And when our bodies can release some of that, when we can lament, when we can atone, when we can do some of that, we are actually in the space to get more creative. Because we aren't hijacked. Our amygdala, the security guard in our brain, isn't on high alert, danger, 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 right? Because when those are the messages that we are getting biochemically, we focus then on the harm, but often that focusing on the harm then makes it difficult for us to focus on the resolution of the harm. We get hijacked by the harm itself. So we're trying to make room for us to get creative, for us to generate different kinds of solutions, for us to break patterns and habits that perpetuate diminished well-being in us and those we love. All right, y'all, I'm about to finish up. This last thing here is engaging in acts of resistance and creativity. You all do this all the time, right? We challenge beliefs, relationships, systems, structures that endanger our lives and the well-being of our people. We challenge beliefs, systems, structures, institutions that endanger our lives and the well-beings of our people. We what? We challenge. This is not the group that rolls over. We work to replace what endangers us with what empowers us and benefits the whole. So part of this is challenging beliefs and structures and institutions, but the other part of this, which I am maturing into, I spent the first almost 30 years of my career trying to dismantle systems and structures, and now as I'm on this side of my half a century, it's all about what can I seed? What systems and structures and institutions and practices am I willing to seed? S-E-E-D. Recognizing that I will likely not live to see their full bloom. But that's okay. Right? It's not enough to take something apart. We must then create what it is we want in the world. But to create what we want requires that we are not hijacked. Get that? It's hard to operate outside of the patterns when we're hijacked by them. So we work to replace what is endangering us with something else, right? And many of us have been bullied to just go along to get along. But I love this quote from the great cosmic mother, which says, our accommodations to repressive behaviors, sadistic power relations, competitive greed, and impulses to exploit, dominate, and humiliate leave us scarred and can transform us into purveyors of harm. Not just victims of it. I gave the story about those settlers who came over, many of whom were seeking to escape conditions of harm, caste systems of exclusion that were endangering them, and because they didn't heal, recreated those same caste systems, but they became racial caste systems. So, when we challenge painful status quos, right, we know that usually we get backlash, right? That comes with the territory. But the more we are connected, the more we can withstand. When we are internally grounded and externally connected, right, it aids not only our challenging, but our creating what we want to see in the world. The last thing that I will say, and then I will have helped us, Renee, compress from like 20 minutes over to only 7. I'm going to leave you with this story of our resilience. It is the story of the prairie, lest we think that human beings are the only creatures on the planet with the ability to heal collectively. We are not. We do not stand outside of a set of ecological realities, outside of nature itself. So I went to the Chicago Botanic Gardens, and I did a tour, and on that tour, we came across this prairie. It was huge, beautiful prairie land, and the guide said, you see this wonderful prairie? It is the only preserved prairie in the state of Illinois. The rest of the prairie has been developed and all of that across the state, and there weren't preservation areas. And in an effort to keep this prairie healthy, every few years we do a controlled burn, where we burn it all to the ground so that it may come back up and stay healthy. Now, I grew up in the city. I just told y'all I grew up in Southeast Anacostia, Washington, D.C. So for those of you who have agricultural backgrounds or who have, who understand forestry and such, you understand this. But for this little city girl, I was like, what? How y'all gonna burn the prairie? Right? And she said, no, it turns out that that's necessary for nature and that lightning and all of the natural processes and those things often happen, but we just help it happen. So we burn it to the ground. And I asked her this question. I said, excuse me, lady, Miss Tour Lady, how long does it take for the prairie to grow back? And she looked at me and she said, 3 weeks. And then she went on to say something else. And I said, no. Excuse me. I don't think you understood my question. How long does it take for the prairie to grow back? I don't mean like sprouts, where you see just a little bit of grass coming up. Like, how long does it take for it to grow back? Like, this is 7 feet and it's lush and it's got all this biodiversity. And she looked at me like, no, I don't think you understand me. I meant what I said. 3 weeks. I said, 3 weeks for it to be all the way up here? She said, yeah, I know. She's like, this lady is slow. 3 weeks. So 3 weeks for it to be all. I said, how is that possible? How is that possible? I'm in a room full of seed people, so I want you to hold this. How is that possible? She said, well, what you think of as the prairie is but a fraction of the prairie. When you look at the prairie, you think of what you see as the prairie. But that's actually the smallest part of the prairie. The biggest part of the prairie is subterranean. You do not see it. It's its root system. So 90% of the prairie isn't obvious. You don't see it. It's underground. And that part of the prairie is always connected and it's always creating. And native species have deep roots. So the native species regenerate more quickly. Invasive species have shallow roots. So when we burn, the invasive species don't come back as quickly, and therefore they don't imperil life in the same way. Now, if you all think that I'm giving you the gospel of the prairie just because I like nature, you are missing the deeper point. The majority of the prairie is not what you see, but it is what is unseen. The majority of the prairie is always connected. It has deep roots. Those roots are always connected, and they are always creating, and they are always resourcing. And they contain seeds that only open in the presence of fire. I'm in a room full of seeds that open in the presence of fire. The fires of our times. But we are being resourced by a root system that is always creating, that is always connected, that is always resourcing, and that contains within it great medicine, great wisdom, great power that we can call upon with frequency in the work that we do, lest we suffer from the illusion and the confusion that we are alone. That we are alone. So I'm going to close us back with the words of Reverend Dr. Barbara Holmes, who said, wounds inflicted upon the village pierce the self and soul of us, shatter the I and we of us. We have seen it before so many times, and yet we are surprised and unwilling to look into the vacant gaze of systems that decapitate, mutilate, and incarcerate. But the most important thing she said was, we can stop them, you know. We can stop them, you know. It won't be easy, but it can be done. We can go get and heal the monsters that have been unleashed. Thank you so much.